between the reeds I saw their bodies gleam, who cool no mortal fever in the stream, crying to the woods the rage of their desire, and their bright hair went down in jeweled fire, where crystal broke and dazzled shudderingly, where roses drink the sun's scent and our light play, amid tumbled flowers shall match the death of day.
The flute of Debussy's Faun is like a kind of magic carpet, taking us to new lands. Just as the French Impressionist painters had given the world a new image of colour, shape and texture, just as Mallarmé's poems had used words for their sound and their shape as much as their meaning, so Debussy moves us into a world where light and flexibility is everything. Whereas so much German and Austrian music had been to do with finding order and form and rules, Debussy was searching for a music and an art without feet. So, texture became important, moment for moment. Form was a matter of what was heard. And above all, we were looking at the sense of colour. There's a danger when we talk about Impressionism of all kinds, that we think of something without bones, without muscles, entirely without form. Turner's paintings, which for me are in a way the soul of Impressionism, take a moment of light miraculously and distill it. But in doing that, he's using thousands of little constituent parts with enormous calculation, enormous care, which gives it unity. It's not only music that's reinvented, it's the whole palette of the orchestra. And if the palette of the Austrian and German composers was like a dark oil painting, here we're talking watercolour, or perhaps some kind of painting not yet invented. L'après-midi is so well known now, it's so much an icon of music and art that we tend to forget how new it sounded when it was written. Indeed, people at first thought they were hearing the orchestra tune up. The horns, which were so much a part of the German fixation with hunting and forests, are no longer a blanket which covers. They're somehow a sound which warms and heats and gives us reds and oranges rather than browns. The woodwinds are allowed to do different things. They tend to make shapes which aren't decoration, because in this, decoration becomes substance. The strings become some kind of wash of background, rather like in a watercolour. Very detailed, but not always clear to the ear or eye. The use of little flecks of colour, the use of harps, which don't impinge themselves on your consciousness. All this is completely new. The idea that colour could be a form in itself must have seemed, at the very least, slightly sinful, and at the worst, desperately revolutionary. And indeed, there was revolution going on in Paris in the early 1900s, where many of the world's most talented painters, poets, writers, dancers and musicians had congregated. The boundaries between the arts were becoming more and more blurred, and the dark colours of the 19th century were being crowded out by the rainbows of a new age. One of the absolutely vital figures in the arts around the beginning of the 20th century was not an artist, was not a musician. Indeed, he was a man who said, "My singular talent is that I have no talents." Diaghilev was a great impresario, a great visionary, if not a great thinker, a man of astonishing instincts. Although he had started off as a concert promoter, his main claim to fame is as the manager of the Ballet Russe. Diaghilev managed to persuade the cream of dancers, choreographers, artists and musicians to work together. What he did was to find the firebrands. And at the time, there could have been no greater risk than taking the then 26-year-old Stravinsky and asking him to create a ballet which would last an hour. If there's anyone who one has to say is the sound of the 20th century, it's Stravinsky. One of the most striking things about the Firebird is its youthfulness and energy. There are all the devices of exoticism, Orientalism, of Russian church sounds, of folk music. It's here because it is full of colour. But my God, what carnivorous colours these are. It is not a matter of pale washes. It's not a matter of light diffusing. It's a matter, as always with Stravinsky, of going straight for the jugular. This is rapacious music. It's dangerous music. And although he unashamedly stole some of it from his teacher, Rimsky-Korsakov, even the very notes, it becomes something else. The colours are brilliant and primary. What they have is an unparalleled type of savage glitter. Firebird is an old Russian fairy tale, a classic confrontation between good and evil. To defeat the ogre Castre, Prince Ivan summons up a bird of fire, whose golden feathers light up the night sky. A world away from the savagery of Stravinsky is the music of Maurice Ravel, and it's a measure of Diaghilev's insight that he could take these two great composers and give them their head. He was a man fascinated not only by ancient Greek, Roman, Chinese cultures, but preferably those cultures as refracted through France. Daphnis and Chloé, written just 2 years after The Firebird, must be the most sensuous ballet ever written. If we look at the score in the famous passage where he describes dawn, what one can see is an almost limitless fluttering, an activity built up of so many tiny little pieces that they are almost like grains of sand. What one hears, of course, is the entire beach. For Ravel, the mechanics of writing a piece were often as important as the piece itself. He was a man fascinated by the small, fascinated by mechanical objects, and in fact, famously, he was seen looking at a mechanical bird and saying, "I can hear its heart beating." For Ravel, mere reality had none of the power of pure imagination. Some friends tell a story of him wandering through their house saying, "But it's wonderful, it's a fake Greek vase. This is fantastic, this is a fake painting." As if the whole idea of something that wasn't quite real was going to be more interesting than the heart of the thing itself. He's one of the first composers to really use the actual sounds of birdsong. And in this he's looking forward to Messiaen. But in the gigantic sweep and passion which goes underneath all this detail, he's looking back to Mahler. And it's a very strange and unusual synthesis. Knowing how long all this music took Ravel to write, it is unbelievable just how natural the progression is, how the whole piece seems to convey one great sunrise. Listening to it, one's simply stunned by this dazzling, blinding sense of colour mounting and then breaking like some huge wave. Debussy wrote Je to a commission from Diaghilev. But the ballet was a catastrophe. And it's very interesting that in all the years since it was written, it has never really been successful as a ballet at all. What Debussy was doing was writing music which reflected the state of the cinema. All the contemporary ideas of split screen, of coming in and out of focus, of one image dissolving into another, all these things would have delighted Debussy, and he would have seen that he had blood brothers over the century. The word je applies to the plot, which has to take the prize for the flimsiest ballet plot ever invented, to do with a boy losing a tennis ball, searching for it, finding two women, going in and out of bushes with them, and then going back to playing tennis. But in truth, this music is too subtle for any ballet. You have to realize, at a time that was used to music having some kind of solidity, Debussy's ideal of the orchestra and music without feet had gone into a new area. It's not music without a form, but it's not any form as any composer before would ever have defined it. He was inventing a kind of music that was always in motion. So in fact, this piece is just one long transition. The piece is full of Debussy's trademark arabesques, themes which seem to curlicue round themselves. But one keeps on getting little sniffs of something else, of little waltzes, of little marches, smells of a breeze, and one has to learn simply to give oneself in to this type of strange, cinematic, dreamlike logic. This music is spectral, evanescent, a peripheral vision glimpsed from the corner of an eye. People were saying, how can music constantly be going somewhere without arriving? Now, there is a saying which says, it's better to journey than to arrive. Debussy is saying, you must never consent to arrive. Debussy was making a melody out of colours. Although the actual notes are important, how they're dressed, what shape they make, what shadows they cast, is as important as the sheer fact of the notes